where are the North Koreans? What are they doing? How's the pornography? Have you tapped into some of their favorite sites yet? Or
I am genuinely curious about these North Korean soldiers if they miss home. I'm sure they're not happy in Russia, but do they objectively miss the lifestyle they had? Because living in Russia now, even serving in a trench on the front lines, they're getting to see things they never would have seen otherwise. They're getting to have cross-cultural experiences and try new foods and being able to see the internet with its colorful websites.
what would you encourage people to look out for? This plan or lack of plan, concept of a plan? That's one of the funny gags we have running on the show. What is Putin's reaction going to be?
For my European friends, Ukraine needs you more than ever. The United States is going to do less, and I don't think it's unreasonable to ask Europeans to do more because it's the horde. It's the enemy at the gates. Putin is looking at what the Soviet Empire controlled all the way up to East Germany, and he's willing to compromise.
This is The Global Gambit.
Well, welcome back to part two, and this is still largely water, although I probably might nip off and get some vodka, depending upon how this second part goes down. Part one, we were entering on the point of sort of where Trump sits in the glowing change of international relations, and, well, he sees the world through power politics. So, Jake, very simply, I mean, in the last couple of days, in the run-up to what's known as the Munich Security Conference, a very important security forum here in the European continent, there was a report that was produced by a group of analysts, and they were talking. Ironically, we had a Freudian slip when we first recorded this section, and you thought I meant Putin, but I was actually referring to Trump and his proposed land grabs across Greenland, Canada, Panama, well, even Gaza at this point. So, you know, to the point where we've got European security analysts talking about Trump as a threat to international security in the context of Ukraine and Europe. How do you feel about that?
Trump is a threat to international security. So there's a difference between campaigning and saying whatever you want and then sitting in the Oval Office. When the president speaks, especially about foreign policy, that then becomes U.S. foreign policy. Congress is not involved with U.S. foreign policy. They don't set it. The president of the United States is America's top diplomat. What he says, what he speaks about, everyone in the federal bureaucracy then has to match what the president said. So when Trump was a candidate, he could say outlandish things. It wasn't U.S. government policy. Now it is. So when Trump talks about militarily seizing Panama or Greenland or forcing through economic coercion Canada to become the 51st state or purchasing and developing Gaza after clearing out its 2 million people, this is U.S. foreign policy. This is not a gaffe. This is not a negotiating tactic. This is not about stopping illegal immigration or drugs at the border. Trump actually wants this. And this is a violation of the international rules-based order and the sovereignty of nations. After World War II, and I'm sorry, there just aren't that many people alive today who remember what it was like prior to 1945. This was a long time ago. Memory has faded, and unfortunately, people have forgotten the lessons. Why we created the UN, why we created the Bretton Woods agreements, why we created rules. The two most basic rules are we don't redraw the maps. We're not going to talk about historical claims and who belonged to what 800 years ago, because those wars will never end then. So all international borders are inviolable. You cannot invade your neighbor and then demand to the global community, I took it through force, it's mine now. You have to recognize it. The other one being freedom of navigation of the seas. We're not going to have rival empires with buccaneers and privateers constantly stealing other people's merchant ships. But this international rules-based order that has basically kept the peace, kept major industrial powers and now nuclear powers from killing each other. These rules that we've had for the last 80 years are breaking down because people like Donald Trump and Elon Musk want to throw them out the window and return us to an age of empire. Donald Trump keeps talking about we need to make America great again. And what period of time is he talking about? And, people were jokingly saying, we'll go back to the 1950s before the civil rights movement, or we'll go back to the 1970s before the women's rights movement. But he's talking about McKinley, like the 1890s. And tariffs, before we had a national income tax. And the United States fought a very stupid war with Spain. This was the Spanish-American War, in which the United States seized the Philippines and Cuba, Puerto Rico. Cuba used to be a U.S. territory until we gave it up. Same with the Philippines. But Trump believes to have a legacy, to have the people love him. This is something that Julius Caesar also thought about. You got to expand the borders. And this clip of Trump on Air Force One, the airplane with the big board showing the Gulf of America, and he's proudly saying America is expanding. America is getting bigger. This is how Caesars think. This is how dictators think. And we're going to have a test. At some point, Donald Trump is probably going to order the U.S. military to take military action to seize or bomb a town in Gaza, Panama, Canada, Greenland, wherever, and kill innocent people. And it's going to be up to those generals whether or not they want to follow that order. I argue it's going to be unconstitutional, it's unethical, it's un-American to use our military. We've always had police actions, but we never tried to make Iraq the 51st state or Afghanistan the 51st state. There's a difference between saying we're going to have a police action to stop someone else from doing something horrible than just outright imperialism and saying this territory now belongs to us, their people belong to us, their resources belong to us. And when Donald Trump says us, he means me. That those people in that territory belongs to me now.
I think that when
am I not being PC enough? I feel like everybody in the media is censoring themselves right now, they're hedging their bets, and I just don't care anymore. I'm a patriot. When I served in the U.S. Air Force for 6 years, I took an oath to the Constitution. Military officers do not swear allegiance to any president, king, or dictator. We swear allegiance to federal law and the Constitution. And unless Congress debates and votes on anything, nothing Donald Trump is going to try and do the next 2 or 4 years is going to be constitutional.
I think it's a comparison I'm having of the first time we ever spoke and the difference in style of delivery you now conduct yourself with, Jake, which I think is quite refreshing. But you mentioned about tariffs, and I just wanted to remind people that the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of 1930 was a complete disaster. It worsened and lengthened the Great Depression around the world and the US and dramatically reduced US trade and kind of indirectly led to factors that caused World War II. So tariffs now, let alone in the interwar period, not really a good idea. I made a video on this if you want to hear me rant about it, but in the description below you can find it probably. But Jay, okay, in the context of Ukraine, of General Kellogg, of the fact that he's extended it to 100 days, that if Putin doesn't capitulate more, play ball, he's doing these maximalist demands, that Trump might not just think, screw it, I'm going to continue to support Ukraine. I might not want to think about them too much or talk about them too much, but, maybe it's within my interests to do so. If I get that mineral trade deal. What do you think?
Once again, you mentioned tariffs first, and I just want to talk about tariffs in general, and then we'll talk about the mineral rights deal. But with tariffs, if they're done correctly, it's not a big deal. For example, Trump just introduced 25% tariffs on aluminum and steel from the European Union, Canada, Mexico, etc. That is actually kind of the appropriate use for tariffs when you want to protect your own domestic industry because you think it's vital. If U.S. steel manufacturers can't compete with international partners, well, then they go out of business. They go bankrupt. There's a big scandal now, I think, with U.S. Steel trying to be purchased by a Japanese company. And then it would be, Japan's an ally, but there are certain people who say we have to protect domestic steel production. So when you put a 25% tariff on imports, that means domestic producers can increase their prices by 24%. You can either buy it from Mexico or Canada for 25% more, or you can buy American, and now the American company can raise their price. There is no, we put up tariffs and things get cheaper. Tariffs, in every instance, will make things more expensive. And sometimes it's justified. It's sometimes, once again, you want to protect domestic industry. In the event there's a war, you might need steel and aluminum production. So that is actually the correct use of tariffs. And I want to give Trump credit, but I don't think that's his primary motivation. I genuinely believe he's trying to generate revenue for himself. Like, Trump is trying to figure out how to raise money that he can then use that money. Congress is supposed to have the power of the purse. They're supposed to be able to raise tax revenue and spend it. Trump is trying to come up with some kind of alternate source of revenue that he then thinks he can control and distribute. So that's another constitutional crisis coming down the road. I also think globalization in general is breaking down. If the United States Navy stops patrolling the world's oceans and protecting the international shipping of all countries, well, then we don't want parts and pieces for our supply chains being sourced all over the world, because international trade is going to break down. The geopolitical strategist Peter Zion, he talks about this. I've read all 4 of his books. It's a very compelling argument that if the United States Navy stops protecting all international shipping, then pirates or state actors, nations, are going to start seizing each other's ships. If tankers and cargo vessels cannot get across the oceans safely, then we need our own defense, domestic production of everything to be self-sustaining and efficient. If the old world falls, Pyotr, if everything on the other side of the Atlantic and the other side of the Pacific de-evolves into chaos, the United States is going to retreat to just North and South America, and they're going to tell the rest of the world, you're on your own. We're now basically an island separate from the rest of the world. Do you want to react to that first?
Well, I think it's true. I mean, international order, grand strategy, great power competition, that's my thematic specialty. I mean, we could look at 2011 when the Somalian pirates was a huge issue around the world, and the US led an international coalition, which worked, right? Just the use of force and military response sorted that issue out. So if the US...
Well, it's the Houthis in the Red Sea the last 2 years as well.
Yes, slightly different circumstances, but indeed. I think more to the point, though, yes, the US, if it retreats too much. I'm not against protectionism in principle. I do agree with you very much on protecting and encouraging domestic industry, for sure. But I think it's when you're doing it against your allies and partners in such an aggressive way that you don't consider the longer-term consequences of the distrust or unreliability you present yourself as a partner. And given
Trump
that
does not view anyone as being America's ally or interest anymore. I mean, aside from Israel. Israel appears to be the only country that Trump likes.
Indeed, but the point I'm making is that, again, you can go to a point where you want to be self-sufficient, disengage a bit, but complete isolationism is, 1, not realistic, and 2, impossible. And so if Trump is going to undermine dependability of the US to such an extent, who's that going to embolden? The Chinese, the Russians, the Iranians, any nefarious actor that wants to not just undermine the United States and the order that it's led, but its entire existence, right? So that's where I worry, is how far Trump's going to go in these more protectionist America first policies. Do you see my point?
Yeah, and nobody in the Trump administration cares. They don't care about France or Germany or the UK or Canada or Mexico thinks about the United States anymore. I'm horrified by that position. I oppose that position. I'm just stating reality. And I mean, yeah, we're in uncharted territory. What's going to happen?
No, I certainly agree. We're in deglobalization now, for sure. And I think that, again, I'll phrase it this way. I'll put it to you as a question. You know, Trump seems to think, or more than MAGA supporters, right, about Ukraine. Let's use Ukraine because this second half is about Ukraine, which is they seem to think that by withdrawing, disengaging, that's somehow going to dissuade the nefarious actors from still wanting to meddle in American affairs, be that in Ukraine or whatever. Nothing happens in a vacuum, Mr. Trump. And that's what I do not understand. So help me understand this, be it using Ukraine as a case study or not. Jake, you know, how far can this go before it really is a huge detriment?
This is a slam dunk for Trump. If he wants the easiest win he will ever be presented with, all he has to do is keep supporting Ukraine, increase sanctions, keep providing weapons, Russia is deploying donkeys and camels to the front lines. These pictures and videos I'm seeing of the current state of the Russian military is pathetic. If the Trump administration wants the easiest win they will get the next 4 years, increase sanctions, keep supplying weapons, the Russians, especially with their oil refinery industry collapsing, their rail networks collapsing, their shipping networks collapsing, their aviation industry collapsing, it's not going to take much more. And yeah, Ukraine is the most pro-American country in the world. If Donald Trump wants statues of himself erected across a nation, Ukraine would be the one to do it if Donald Trump took that easy victory. Unfortunately, the Russians have infiltrated MAGA. People like Tucker Carlson continue spreading lies, and MAGA is divided. And I think Donald Trump doesn't like having conflict within his own base. He wants his base homogeneous and on the same page on so many issues. But within MAGA, you see it and feel it all the time. Like they're confused what to believe because Tucker Carlson is telling them one thing, and people like Piers Morgan is telling them something completely different. Bless Piers Morgan. I'm going to give him a shout out because he's been focusing he's not even American, but he somehow made himself a central figure in MAGA by being such a Trump cheerleader the last 6 months. He claims he's an independent and he's nonpartisan and neutral, and that's just nonsense. So yeah, I even appreciate Lex Friedman giving that podcast interview because it made Zelensky look really good. And I'm excited for this podcast episode with Putin that should be happening with an AI English voice dub over. That's going to be really weird to watch. I'm actually excited for this to come out. So yeah, my attitude is, like you said, they could still end up doing the right thing for the wrong reasons, but doing the right thing for the right reasons. Standing up for the NATO alliance, making sure that the European continent is peaceful and secure because the EU is America's largest trading partner. More than 1 million citizens, U.S. citizens, live and work in Europe, and the president should really care about those people. So yeah, Trump could still end up doing the right thing, but he's going to do it over mineral rights, wanting $500 billion of the rare earth.
But yeah, explain to me how that would actually happen, though, because a large proportion of Ukraine's minerals and resources of like that are in the east. I mean, they have a lot everywhere, but sort of a lot of it is, well, not accessible anymore because Russia either controls that area or it's been completely destroyed. So how exactly does Trump think he's going to get, this deal?
I'd say Zelensky has no clue, and Zelensky doesn't care. If Trump says he wants $500 billion worth of the rare earth, Zelensky's just saying, okay, sure, send me the contracts, I'll sign them. What does Ukraine have to lose if Russia keeps advancing anyways? But this is all nonsense that American companies would build infrastructure. This would be upfront investments of tens of billions of dollars to build facilities and mines and rail networks and roads and bridges to get all of these resources out. And no American company is going to do that without security guarantees. Why would you spend billions in capital expenditures if the Russians are just going to start the war again, destroy your factories or facilities, or seize those factories and facilities for themselves in the next war? So Zelensky's actually being pretty smart. He's saying, yeah, give me the contracts. I will sign whatever I need to sign with Chevron or ExxonMobil or ConocoPhillips or whoever. Because then those companies are going to talk to Trump. And the executive, the CEO of ExxonMobil is going to tell Trump, we're not going to partner with Ukraine unless there's security guarantees. Unless Ukraine becomes part of NATO or the U.S. starts building military bases in Ukraine, we're not going to waste tens of billions of dollars when the Russians are just going to bomb our factories or mines or seize them for themselves. So it's bizarre. I mean, it's really bizarre. Like, is what I'm saying making sense to you? Like, because I don't feel like this is what the public discussion is. Like, I don't think the media talks in this language when it's pretty apparent what Zelensky is trying to do right now.
Well, I think without personalizing it too much, I think there's a reason maybe, I mean, you're bigger than I am in terms of subscribers and channel size, so maybe you get more opportunities. But I mean, I talk very much about these sorts of things, but no, I've never been approached by the mainstream media for some reason. And I think it's like sort of maybe it's a
Neither
dirty.
have I.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, there you go. Sort of like, is it a bit of a dirty smell, a bad smell that you have a YouTube channel and you have a little bit more vocality about you? You say the things that they don't want to say. I do want to.
As Elon Musk says, we are the media now.
Well, we are. We're citizen journalists, right? Same.
I call myself a commentator.
Okay.
I do have very high regards for journalists. I'm always linking and sharing articles from real journalists doing the real investigative work on the ground. I view myself as a commentator. I try to understand. I try to connect the dots and then discern it for my audience. And I'm very fortunate to have a very large audience. But I sometimes feel like I'm screaming into the void and I'm not making an impact. Like I make my arguments. I know hundreds of thousands of people are getting them. And then I see the mainstream media keep repeating the stupidest things they talk about.
Don't put yourself down, mate. You've raised over $1 million. That's not having an impact now.
3.5 million.
Oh, my bad. So, I'm sorry, I meant in the latest campaign, right?
Yeah.
No, well, that's insane, right? And I don't think any media outlet would be amiss recognizing that. But for some reason, they think it's maybe a bit too much of a reputational risk to them to host people who don't have, I don't know, a PhD or a more academic background or some kind of field experience, even though you do with your military background. I prefer the word.
I also have a master's in international relations, which I don't talk about.
Well, there you go. Right, we're equating on that, but I prefer pundit because it's more. It allows alliteration for me as Pyotr. But anyway, I guess I want to ask you a couple of questions on the tactical level, Jake. Which is, where are the North Koreans? What are they doing? How's the pornography? Have you tapped into some of their favorite sites yet? Or
I'm sure. Yeah, those. I am genuinely curious about these North Korean soldiers if they miss home. I'm sure they're not happy in Russia. But do they objectively miss the lifestyle they had? Because living in Russia now, even serving in a trench on the front lines, they're getting to see things they never would have seen otherwise. They're getting to have cross-cultural experiences and try new foods and being able to see the internet with its colorful websites. Yeah, I'm sure it's having an impression on them. But specifically, these North Koreans, a little over 10,000 were sent. And this was a test run. I think Kim Jong-un wanted to see how they'd be used and how they would do before agreeing to send more.
Right.
And it's also about money. These North Korean soldiers are not receiving paychecks. I'm sure they're given a very small amount every week or month, but $2,000 a month per soldier is being paid directly to Kim Jong-un. Kim Jong-un's family is getting the salaries of these soldiers on the front lines. And the casualty counts are horrendous. They range between 3,000 and 5,000. Those are the estimates from Western military experts. And yeah, they're just meat. They're being used in meat assaults in the Kursk region. Russia has retaken a significant part that was once controlled by Ukraine, but it has been over 6 months, and Russia still can't even liberate all of their own sovereign territory in the Kursk region. So will Kim Jong-un send more? And I think he will. I don't think he's going to send 100,000 or 200,000, but he might send another 10,000. Because why not? I think Kim Jong-un, he's a young guy. He's younger than me, and he's dictator for life, supreme commander. And he's lonely. Kim Jong-un doesn't get out very much, and not a lot of people visit him. And I feel like he sees this war between Russia and Ukraine as his opportunity to get satellites and nuclear submarines and missile technology. And all he has to do is lose a couple 10,000 soldiers and then make some artillery shells for Putin. I don't think there's any ideological link between these two countries. They don't have any common goal. It's just about resources, money, power, prestige, and attention.
It's a strategic partnership. That's what it is. And they signed that in June. So, no, it doesn't go beyond. I mean, Russia has some ethnic overlap with North Korea, I suppose, but it's not and something that Putin gives enough of a crap about in the context of Ukraine. So, what about then, sort of as we begin to look ahead? What of, therefore, Russia's ability to hold itself? I mean, I'm not going to overplay the economics aspect. I think more people have wanted the economy to collapse, and it has been likely to. The resilience is there. But do you think we could see more cracks appearing of the Russian economy in the next year or something?
I remember Budnov gave an interview a couple months ago, and he was asked point blank, when is the Russian economy going to see real cracks, real breaks? And he said June of this year.
Right.
So that's not that far off now. It's only about 3 months away. And we need some kind of financial panic in which foreign investors pull their money out. There are still international businessmen, probably businessmen from China, India, Saudi Arabia, or whatever, who still think Russia is a good investment opportunity. They're not investing at the same rates they were maybe 5 years ago, but they're still not pulling their money out.
Mm.
And Russia is a house of cards. We got this fantastic report. His last name was Kennedy. He was a former vice president at Morgan Stanley. And he exposed that the Kremlin has been forcing Russian banks to give unsecured loans to defense companies in order to keep producing. So no Russian defense contractor has been operating at a profit for at least the last 2 years. Solyov slipped up and admitted this on Kremlin state TV after meeting with them. So if no defense contractor has been operating at a profit for over 2 years, and they're just borrowing money through unsecured loans that the Kremlin is forcing private banks to give out, you can only make your debt payments by taking on more debt. And that's exponential growth of debt. And it's a house of cards that the Kremlin is propping up, but eventually somebody is going to cash out and say, this is too risky for me. And once there's a panic, once people start pulling their money out, it becomes a cascade effect and then everything collapses in on itself. So who loses in this scenario? And it's Putin's inner circle. It's his oligarchs. Billionaires don't actually have piles of cash, in a money vault like Scrooge McDuck does. Like billionaires have equity in stuff, equity in companies and physical assets, locations, real estate. So who is going to be wiped out when none of the debt payments can be made? And it's going to be the oligarchs who have billions in equity in these banks and defense companies. They're the ones who are going to be wiped out when this catastrophic cascade begins. As long as math is real and numbers matter, then there's going to be a reckoning at some point for the Russian state, as every day it just compounds and compounds and gets worse and worse.
Well, given the state of disinformation and propagandism, maybe maths isn't a thing. But still, Jake, I mean, my last question, I suppose, is largely just what should we look out for? I mean, we'll have you back relatively soon, I hope. Maybe at the time when Russia's economy is fracturing, or maybe before. But what would you encourage people to look out for? This plan or lack of plan, concept of a plan? That's one of the funny gags we have running on the show from Trump, and what's Putin's going to be? What is Putin's reaction going to be?
For my European friends, Ukraine needs you more than ever. The United States is going to do less. And I don't think it's unreasonable to ask Europeans to do more because it's the horde. It's the enemy at the gates. Putin is looking at what the Soviet Empire controlled all the way up to East Germany. And he's willing to compromise and maybe get halfway through Poland. But he wants the Baltics back. I don't think he likes the independence of Finland. Moldova is a non-starter for him. He's going to finish off Georgia, potentially Armenia. He's going to want maybe parts of Romania as well. So you can't look to the United States for leadership. I apologize as an American. This is shameful for me as an American. But Donald Trump and Elon Musk, who is president, they're not going to lead, and they're not going to help you. But I do believe that the average person is good and they want the best for their neighbors. I just don't think that reflects on social media. because algorithms are driven by hate and outrage, and what you see is not what the true reality is. So for every individual, do what you can on the local level. See if you can organize on the local level and connect with people on the local level. Don't look to the Twitter and Facebook algorithms to give you guidance. Everyone has to take initiative on their own. Russia is spent. After 3 years of fighting, the Russian military is now using donkeys on the front lines. There's still a lot of them. They're still very deadly and dangerous, but...
Wait, the donkeys or the Russians?
I do have serious sympathy for those donkeys.
Same ways.
But you're asking, keep doing what you can. Don't despair. Don't give up. Ukraine is still going to win this war. I've actually never believed that more than I do now. But people have to be doing more, who still care and who still believe.
Well, on that very uplifting message, despite the cesspit that I think X has become and the fact that I have finished this and it wasn't at any point vodka, unfortunately, Jake, thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure. I'd love to continue, but I know you have other things to do, namely going back to covering what's happening on Ukraine on a daily basis. And everyone, if you enjoyed the video, then do give it a like, a subscribe. And if you don't know Jake, well, what are you doing? Go and follow him as well and support what he does, because he does... Well, I like to say that we both do, in our own ways, me on a much smaller scale, important work to support the defense of a sovereign state like Ukraine. But everyone, as we say on the Global Gambit, wish you a good day, and you've got to get playing or be played. Take care, everyone.